Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Anirvan in Conversation with Industry Experts. Most of the organizations constantly try and run process improvement initiatives, but very few people are actually aware of a clever way of doing it through a concept called process mining. That is the topic of today's discussion. And to talk about this particular subject, we've been joined by one of the industry experts, Enno Kroesen. Welcome, Enno. Let's start with a brief introduction.
Hi, Anirvan. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to speak about process mining. Well, I've been in consulting for most of my adult life, something like 25 years. I started my career in some of the big 5 consulting firms, did a lot of ERP implementations there. And what struck me even during those early years of consulting was the difficulties that one would have in capturing and communicating the end-to-end process. Right, so while process requirements, they should be the main focal point in discussions with the customer on how to configure their ERP systems and should drive the actual choices being made during the implementation of an ERP system. So later, I moved into the field of process improvement and process transformation, with the discovery of processes playing an even bigger part in providing a solution. Well, in these days, and I'm guessing that a lot of the audience will have the same experiences, in these days, usually process discovery was done with brown paper sessions, with gathering a group of experts and trying to map out their processes using sticky notes and markers and all that, right? So very inefficient. And even then, one of my clients said, well, remember, the devil will always be in the details. So if you are not aware of these details, you might as well not do it at all. It's not enough to have a general understanding of the process. You should really have the detailed knowledge of what is going on in each of the processes. So it must have been a little over 3 years ago that I came across the notion of process mining, which is what I want to talk to you about today. I was immediately captivated by the concepts and by the opportunities that it would bring in process improvement. So very soon after that, I quit my job and I started my company, ProMelius, which is Latin for improvement, something like that. Not completely translatable, but okay. But we're specialized in fact-based process improvement, helping customers through an objective analysis of their processes. And that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years.
Got it. We have a lot of viewers who are experts in technology, but on the other side, other viewers who are not so familiar. So for the benefit of people who are not so familiar about process mining, maybe explain to them the difference between process mining versus, let's say, typical process mapping exercise.
I don't know if a couple of words will suffice, but I'll do my best. So process mining basically is a solution, it's software which retrieves event data from your database, from the company databases, your customer databases. And these could be databases like SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, Trello, etc. Basically any database that has a number of elements in it. They should be capturing a case. So what is the subject that we're talking about? They should be maintaining an activity. So what is it that the subject, the case, is doing? And then third, it should be holding a timestamp. So when is this subject doing the activity? If we have those 3 elements, that would be an event data log, and we can have a large number of attributes accompanying that. If we have those 3 plus the attributes, then we would be able to basically show a visual representation of the process. So all of this came about maybe like 15 years ago. There was some very crude academic software, but since then it's evolved into numerous commercial applications. Maybe what would help is a little bit of an example. So if we look, for instance, at the purchase to pay process, I think most people should be able to relate to that. Purchase to pay process normally begins with a purchase requisition or even earlier than that, but for the sake of simplicity, let's start with the purchase requisition. Then the purchase order is created, the goods are received, the invoice is received, and the invoice is paid. With process mining software, you can extract all of these activities from your database and map that into something like a BPMN model. Not completely a BPMN model because we don't have any swim lanes or anything like that, but it's a flow of activities with arrows and that you can follow to see what your processes actually look like. But process mining and the software, it can bring a lot more than that alone, right? Since we are capturing the individual cases, you can follow the individual purchase requisitions. So one purchase requisition, how that flows through the system, when it is executed, the order in which the activities are executed, if you see any deviations in their execution, which could be very interesting. For instance, when you have an invoice that is being paid before the goods are received, that is something that we would want to notice, right? So process mining software can provide an alert on that, and you can see if a certain department is more prone to that deviation from the normal activity than other departments or people or countries that are more deviant than others, and you can enforce standardization much more. And next to that, you can visualize how long it would take for a case to complete, basically. Yeah? So from the initial purchase requisition, how much time does it take before the actual invoice is being paid? And is that different per country or different per vendor maybe, or those kind of things? It is possible for you to visualize how long you would have to wait between the activities. So not only how long an activity takes, but maybe it's somewhere in transport or transit or just waiting on someone's desk. And we've seen extreme examples that people are only processing invoices on the Friday when they are at work. So it stays there for a number of days, which could be risky if you have rebates that you can take by early payment, right? And you can even see when a case is finished. So maybe there are cases that are not finished with a payment of the invoice, but they have a credit note in there or those kind of things that you can easily visualize and see what kind of material groups or purchasing groups or vendors are more prone to these kind of activities. So it's a lot that can be done. It's not only for purchase to pay, obviously, it's basically for everything, every process that allows for visualization. So be it order to cash, record to record, record to report, or detect to correct, as long as there's a case we can follow, there's activities, and then there's the time that these activities are captured, are executed, all of these three are captured. You can even think a little bit further than just the examples that I gave just now. You can even push it towards for instance, a narrow customer journey in which you see when people are clicking on your website and how they are moving through your website. So are they moving from one page to the next page? Are they staying longer at one page than the other page? And it's sort of complementary to something like Google Analytics. There's some overlap there, but it could still be very interesting, especially if you mark that against a certain time that they're clicking. It could be, for instance, it could be correlated to a marketing campaign or something like that. So that could be very interesting. Besides the whole visualization, which is the easy part, right? You just have a visual representation of your process. Process mining software goes a lot further than that. So there's a whole, some vendors offer a complete business intelligence layer on top of that, or a business process management layer on top of that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. But there could even be an actionable workflow to identify exceptions to your standardized process, and then providing a notification or an email or whatever for people to intervene into that process to make sure that the standard is followed once again, or to identify opportunities for improvement in that process. So it's a long story, but process mining can do a lot.
Thank you for the explanation, Enno. You mentioned a few elements, things like timestamp, things like a particular transaction. Are these elements commonly captured by companies?
They are in ERP systems. In most ERP systems, we've come across some rudimentary ERP systems that don't capture these kind of things. There's one other, we've been at a company that didn't capture any changes to their purchase orders, for instance, right? So only the latest information was available, and especially changes made to purchase orders in this case is very interesting to see, because that could account for a lot of waiting time or not being first time right. So from a lean perspective, it's very inefficient to have to keep changing those kind of things.
Right. So what you're saying is most of the companies would have this piece of information already captured in an ERP or another system. So that means that your process mining technology can be easily ported to the system, or you could probably extract the data from the ERPs and CRMs and other systems and can put it easily into your software, into your technology for process mining. Will that be correct?
Easily is always a difficult term, right?
Yeah.
It's relatively easy. So there's basically two modus of operandi that you can follow here. One would be to provide a CSV file or whatever with your complete event log, with all of your event data, which would be basically one big Excel file or CSV file, right? So Excel file, I think, is limited to 1 million records. CSV, you can go indefinitely. It's just a matter of processing speed on your server or computer that would hinder you in that. This is something that we normally use for proofs of concepts and these kind of things. You wouldn't want to do that in a live environment. It would just be too tedious. So these companies normally would be implementing interfaces, API interfaces, could be standardized interfaces that port straight into your SAP tables or Oracle tables or whatever tables and collect the data from there automatically on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, those kind of things. And then still, you can imagine, so for instance, I'll give you an example. One of the proof of concepts that we recently did, without giving too much detail because we're still in that project, it came down to us having to extract 15 SAP tables that were just transactional, and then a number of master data tables as well to make sure that the event log made sense in the end. So all of these tables had to be normalized and put into this one table. And that takes a lot of time, right? Because we don't want to capture some of the SAP tables, they've got over 100 attributes. We don't want that. We just want the relevant ones. So we very much look towards the IT department in companies and the process owners. What is the most relevant data that should be captured to make sure that that is captured and to make sure that we are not pushing the limitations of the system as much. So in this example, we had 85 million lines times 16 attributes. So that takes some time to enter into a system as a CSV file. But we, in a proof of concept, it's customary to do that. And it takes about a week to get all that in there. But if you want to go for a live environment, then interfaces would make much more sense.
Typically, where do organizations start? What processes? What kind of a scenario?
Normally, since process mining is pretty new and a lot of companies don't know about the potential that it has, once we get a company interested enough, we are normally doing a proof of concept. And I think that's common across the market to do a proof of concept, to take some of the company data to basically show them what the possibilities are. After that, we normally sit together with the customer, try to get to a list of potential candidates for a process mining implementation, make sure that the first project is not too difficult because they need to get used to the whole concept of process mining. And we don't want to have a failure early on. We don't want to have a failure at all, but if we take an easy process with low-hanging fruit, as they say, it would be easier to implement that. As soon as we've done that, the proof of concept, which we normally do in a standalone environment, so not integrated with any interfaces, then it would be time to think about what kind of process mining software would best be fitting for your company, right? So there's around 30 vendors currently commercially at the market. Some are better in some aspects, some are better in other aspects, some have a different price range. So it would be interesting to capture the requirements. What are the non-functional, even the functional requirements that companies would have for this kind of software? So we sit together with the customer, help them in formulating their requirements, and then we help them select the software. We implement the software, and then we start analyzing this process. And then normally everybody's so enthusiastic, and I say that with a big smile on my face because I've seen it happen again and again. People are really captured by the power of process mining and they cannot wait to implement their processes. So at that time, we start a big rollout plan across the company.
I'm sure process mining definitely gives that perspective with all the visualization. In your experience, what kind of process do they experiment with first with process mining?
There's a lot of things that you can do with process mining, right? If you look at operational excellence, for instance, normally companies start with a simple process like purchase to pay or order to cash, a relatively simple process. But there are other examples, for instance, in auditing, almost come to maturity much earlier. They use it for process mining auditing. So capturing your process, seeing if there's process compliance, if there are things like 4 eyes principle that are being adhered to, certain order of activities are not the way that they are prescribed. It very much depends on what kind of company, what kind of market you're looking at. We see financial industry is pretty much far ahead. The telco companies are pretty far ahead on process mining, and they've already captured that more than heavy industry or make to order, make to stock kind of companies.
Got it. Now looking at different scenarios. If you look at the process mining, as you explained, there is a period of pilot followed by actual implementation. It also means that companies need to put in effort as well as spend some money. What would be a good business case that customers come up with to adopt process mining?
It's always a bit tricky. As I said, it very much depends on what kind of market you're in. There's a lot of business cases that are out there which could make it interesting for companies, right? So we've already seen for a long time now the whole operational excellence movement and the Lean Six Sigma kind of projects. I've been involved in those as well. And normally it's very much relying on these brown paper sessions that I mentioned earlier to actually capture the process in as much detail as possible. But it's always subjective. It's always partial. It doesn't really help you on the low-hanging fruit, on the individual details, on the deviations that can easily be avoided, especially where they're occurring. So process mining can really help with the whole discovery phase in a Lean project or in a Six Sigma project. Other cases are companies that go for a cost reduction. So basically eliminating all your non-value add activities, processes, or even work more towards standardization or even work towards the implementation of robotic process automation. That could be a really big business case. You could use process mining for benchmarking. You could benchmark your different departments, your countries, your business units. You could even make it down to a person-to-person level. We have never done that, and I don't really think that's something that would help selling software in a company. But in theory, it's possible to compare individuals as to how efficient they are. It sounds almost like Big Brother. I don't know if we should want that in the end. You can have, for instance, if you do an ERP implementation, you would want to have a proper baseline of how quick your processes are and how much they cost potentially versus after the implementation, how much they would cost then or how long they would take. It's possible with process mining to make a very objective comparison between those, right? So it really helps you in assessing the realization of your business case in ERP implementations. Another one is, for instance, KPI monitoring. You can very easily, especially process KPIs, right? You can very easily see if your process is executing towards the standards that you set up front. Seeing like, for instance, an SLA that you have with a subcontractor or with a shared service center, you're very easily capable of seeing how they are doing. But not only that, you can see which activities are causing a delay potentially. So that can be very helpful. It can be even helpful for shared service centers themselves as well. But if you have an outsourced shared service center or somewhere in India or China or whatever, and they're using your system, it's very easy to see how they're doing. And it prevents a lot of manual reporting activities there. I mentioned process auditing already, which has embraced the whole process mining concept and software for compliance issues and documentation of the actual processes on a case-by-case basis. So it's very hard to pinpoint a most common business case, a most common opportunity for companies. It sort of depends on the company, the market, the maturity they have in process thinking, which is another aspect. But yeah, there's a lot for everybody. Let's put it like that.
Got it. If we look at Lean Six Sigma, that's something that you mentioned, and operational excellence. We used to use two flavors. One was pure play lean concepts, which was people got educated on them, trained on them, and they would just go out and implement. This is kind of at the grassroots level. But when the problems became more sophisticated, more complex, we would always give a business case where the benefit coming out of the business case always was larger than the effort and the investment mentioned about ERP implementations. So I don't know if you're in a position to give some sort of figures around costs involved.
So very early on, we've looked at business models like pain gain models and percentage of saving revenue. That's very tricky, right? So there's always going to be discussion around what generated the savings so we stepped away from that. So overall, a implementation of process mining software, and it depends on how big you want to do it, how extensive you want to do it, how quickly you want to do it, and who do you want to involve, and the vendor. There's a lot of difference between vendors in price, but it would come down to something, including consulting fees, between 50,000 and anywhere up in the millions.
That's actually quite important for some of our viewers and listeners, because by implementing a 50,000, if they can get a benefit of, let's say, 500,000, 500,000, I think that's absolutely desirable to do.
One point on that, in addition to that. So we always say to our customers, it's not just about the savings that you make, it's about the customer satisfaction that you achieve with that as well. So if you're able to deliver your products more efficiently or more structured way, then that's really a benefit as well, which we cannot measure straight away into financial gains or savings, but it helps your company in satisfying your customers, which is your net promoter score is always increasing, hopefully, on that one. So tricky, but it's not all about the immediate savings and gains.
Yeah, that's, I think, a very important point. So in fact, it's also a good segue to my next question, which is around the changes organizations need to bring in. Now, you alluded to some of the benefits that people may get once they have organize it. What are some of the changes that needs to be brought about in order to extract maximum from a process mine?
Well, obviously, since most companies do not have process mining expertise, they need to bring that in. On the other hand, most companies that I know don't want to pay external consultants till the end of times. So probably they would need to build up some knowledge internally as well. So we normally recommend creating something like a competence center or something like that would hold the knowledge of process mining software, processes, and to pull that all together. From another perspective, what's really helpful in process mining implementations is if the company is thinking in terms of process. So we've seen a lot of companies that are thinking as silos, with management responsibility strictly for purchasing or even purchase order handling. This, from a process mining perspective, the company thinks like that. The gains that you would get from process mining are very limited, probably, because most likely any change would be a sub-optimization in which a silo is doing very good, but another silo somewhere down the process line could be hurting from the whole initiative, right? So process ownership, end-to-end process ownership is something that we very much endorse. It's something that we really like in companies, and we can help that into thinking more into processes, helping them set up their process ownership and the global process ownership end-to-end, because it really helps them. Talking about ownership, yes, process mining is IT, it's software. We are very much thinking along the lines of it shouldn't be owned by an IT department. It should be owned by the business or the process owners, or maybe a lean or operational excellence department, those kind of things. It's not written in stone, but it's something that you would need to think about up front, right? It helps you if the user acceptance is enhanced by placing it in the hands of the process owners, not so much the IT owners. There's been a lot of discussion, should a process mining implementation be top-down, meaning that C-level embraces it and forces it down the hierarchy, or should it be bottom-up, in which some enthusiastic people find this product, there are cheap versions out there which cost like €1,000 a month. You can start playing with it and maybe that way. We think that neither of these should be the case. It should always be a hybrid. So yes, people on the shop floor, if I can put it like that, on the Gemba, they should be enthusiastic, which will not be that hard, but it needs C-level commitment, C-level support. That really helps it in seeing the whole spectrum and prioritizing projects, prioritizing processes that could benefit from process mining the quickest and the best. So basically, these are some of the changes that would need to be in place for process mining to be effective, to have thought about the ownership of the process, to think about where the drive should come from and who should be involved, to think about end-to-end process ownership, build up the competence internally.
Right. So you mentioned about, I guess, center of excellences needs to be created with some sort of an expertise. For compare and contrast, on one side, we have seen Lean Six Sigma implementations where it has been across different layers of hierarchy, across different teams, people needed to be trained up. On the other side, if we look at, let's say, go-to-market strategy, projects, or even sometimes implementation of a new HR system, it does not need to have an organization-wide mobilization that is required. Where does process mining fit in? I mean,
Good question. What you would find normally is there's different roles in a process mining implementation. So there's people, the really techie people that would have to do the interfaces. Currently still a lot of SQL knowledge required, or Python and R, basically to clean the data already to make sure that the reports are providing you what you want, that the filtering is set up correct. So that's really on an engineering level. Then there's the analyst level where people are basically thinking about what information they would like to see. There's still a little bit of technical data required, but not a lot, but they really need to know the process. The majority of the people that will be involved in process mining in some way are the people that are just using the reports. So the knowledge that they would require on process mining is very limited, unless they're part of some expert group or part of this competence center. They just can reap the benefits of all the thinking that has been done up front, making sure that something is being done with the analysis that is being provided. Is it organization-wide? Probably, hopefully, but not many people would need to know the full extent of the possibilities. They just can work with the outcomes.
Thanks for the explanation. What are some of the challenges organizations face, or others your teams would face during an implementation?
As I mentioned, process mining is pretty new, right? So there's a lot of unfamiliarity with the whole concept and the software. So we've spent a good deal of time on evangelizing this solution, talking to a lot of people, explaining the potential that process mining has. That's one challenge. The next challenge, but it's something that can be overcome, is getting the data into the software. As I mentioned earlier, this company that we did this proof of concept for, 85 million lines, 20 tables into one, it can be daunting, especially if master data. So if you have one SAP system, it's relatively easy. If you have several SAP systems, with your master data not being consistent, pretty tricky, right? So that could be a big challenge before you actually have the data in, and we have before you in the end, when you do an actual project, before you set up all of your interfaces and make sure that the correct data is in, which you can use to analyze your processes. When all of your data is in your process mining software, and you do your full analysis and you look at all the activities and all the possibilities in there, it's one big spaghetti. It's tricky at first, and we really need time with process owners, people who know the process, to focus on what is relevant, to focus on what is interesting, to basically unbundle all of this spaghetti and look for the pearls that are in there. And they're all in there. It's just, it can take some time to disregard the irrelevant parts. It can be a bit overwhelming at first. Software can help you on that, but it can be tricky. And it really, sometimes too little time is involved from the process owners, from the process experts on that. So that can be tricky.
That means they would probably need a lot of education, awareness trainings, workshops to get up to speed.
It really helps. And what we normally do is we take the process owners and we provide them a short training on what is process mining, what can they expect, preferably with the proof of concept data that we've mined earlier, but to show them for their process what it would look like, how you could filter that, how you could pinpoint to a problem area, what they should be looking for. And we work together with them. It's not that we tell them, here's your software, now sit in an ivory tower for a month or whatever, and then come out, tell me what the issues are. No, we really have to work with them intensively, which is a challenge in this COVID-19 time, but we can all do it electronically now these days. So screen sharing and everything, and talks like these. That's one of the advantages, that we are not really hurt by this epidemic.
Got it. Looking into, as you mentioned, process mining is a relatively new concept. Looking into the future, what do you see in regards to trends or business usage for process mining?
We believe there's going to be a shakeout in process mining vendors. There's currently around 30 commercial vendors on the market. Over the next couple of years, probably there will be a shakeout, and it will come to 3, 4, 5 potentially. That will have the big bucks, will get the funding, and that will have enough revenue or money at least to invest in their developments, because developments are going quickly in the field of process mining. So the shakeout, that's for sure. Then we see the integration with other kinds of software like RPA or robotic process automation software. It's really helpful if you have a good look at your process to see what the rule-based activities are, the potential for automation there, and potentially linking that automatically towards robotic process automation to already propose a new process, and even help in your configuration of the software that is that you use to execute your process, the actual transaction. That could be some time away, but we see already an integration between process mining and RPA software. There's one big RPA vendor that already bought a process mining vendor, and we see that going further. Next to the RPA software, there's your BPM software, so basically workflow management. There's going to be a lot. There's already vendors that are doing that currently, other vendors in the previous one, but they're integrating BPM and process mining to basically works towards a workflow and an action engine or those kind of things that notify you more rapidly when something is going differently than you expected by prescribing processes, by processing field usage in your systems. There's a trend towards more like a case management. So a process mining is most interested in the standard process, whereas there's industries where standard processes are less relevant. They're more interested in case management, like hospitals, how do you handle your patients and those kind of things, really providing proper documentation on this specific case and seeing if there's some trend in there somewhere and what should you be thinking about from a documentation perspective or a next step perspective. So that could be very interesting. So that's all functionality. I think another part is we'll see cost coming down, making sure that process mining software is more accessible to small and medium business owners. Could be either a scaled down version from the current software. There's a proposition which we do as well, for instance, like the process mining as a service proposition, in which we hold the software, but companies can provide their data to us and we provide their analysis to them on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, whatever they want. Last one, I'm hoping that process mining software will go more to a low-code kind of environment or even a no-code environment. It's much more drag and drop. It's much less the SQL, Python, R kind of analysis kind of things. We see that in all kind of software that is becoming easier and easier to use. The adoption of process mining software would benefit greatly from making it less techy involved.
So we've seen in Lean Six Sigma projects, companies actually got a lot of benefit by implementing those initiatives. One of the challenges that companies often face is the quality of data. And I believe with process mining, that can be easily resolved.
For sure, these kind of issues would basically be non-existent anymore. Your data would be very clean, would be very complete, would be very objective. It wouldn't depend on who you are talking to. The data speaks for itself, right? That being said, there are still some things to consider when contemplating about process mining implementations. We've seen projects fail, not our projects, of course, but we've seen projects fail because they basically want to boil the ocean on the first try. That doesn't work. So our advice is to start small, no big bangs. The benefits will come, but you will have to give it time for people to get used to your solution. There will never be perfection, right? Even in Lean Six Sigma, you will never get 100% efficiency. So Pareto analysis, that's your friend. 80-20, that works. So don't go for the last drop out of there. There needs to be some slack in there somewhere anyway. I think this counts for every project, but especially for process mining, you should engage your stakeholders. You should really engage both the IT department, the management, process owners, the end users. It's really vital for a proper implementation of process mining. If they start thinking in processes, they need to be involved in these processes. Since process mining is new, you won't have it 100% correct or even 80% correct in your first design, right? So there needs to be flexibility to change during the way. So an agile project management methodology that would really be beneficial in process mining projects, because there will be new insights and people will start wanting to have different things once they see what the possibilities are. Embrace that. It helps your implementation and your acceptance on that. For some processes, I would recommend not to use process mining. Right? There always needs to be a cost-benefit analysis. Some benefits are too small, basically, so don't bother. Just keep doing it the way that you're doing, or do a brown paper sessions or whatever before you have the data in there and put all your effort into analyzing that. If there's no gains, then don't bother with that. Focus on the end-to-end. Don't make sub-optimizations. Don't optimize your silo. Optimize the whole process.
Those are great takeaways, to close the session. I absolutely enjoyed it, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners would enjoy the session as well. So with that, I would like to thank you a lot, Enno. This was a great session on process mining, and hope to see you again sometime in the future.
Sure. And if people want to know anything more about process mining, you can always have a visit to our website, which is promelius.nl. or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to connect with you. It's no issue to basically, if you want to have a discussion around this or want to get some more insight, just contact me. It's no issue. I really would appreciate that actually. So thank you for the opportunity, Anirvan. Really great to evangelize more about the whole process mining concept and the software, and let's hope that it will bring everybody to embrace the whole concept as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enno. For the viewers and listeners, we are going to include those descriptions on how to get in touch with Enno and learn more about process mining. So with that, I would like to close the session today. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Enno, and see you again in the future.
Thank you.
So this was Anirvan in Conversation with Industry Expert, and today we were joined by Enno Kroesen, an expert on process mining. So if you liked the episode, then do not forget to hit the like button, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the subsequent interviews. And with that, I would like to close the session today. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again in the near future in another episode. Till then, bye-bye.